How can small businesses get better at thinking big?
Another short question with a 5 or 10 second answer. It's not that I wrote a whole book just about that. I do spend a lot of my time on workshops with executive teams, and that is what Loonshots is about. Although I think there's a fair point that when I wrote Loonshots, it was more tailored to thinking about the behavior of large groups. And since then, I've spent a lot of time with small to medium sized companies, but especially with hyper growth companies where something is one of their products has hit, they've found product market fit, they've scaled, they've grown big, and they've experienced this transition internally where the team they started out with that was focused on wild, crazy ideas and everybody was rolling up their sleeve to help those ideas move along suddenly feels slower. Something has changed. People, instead of talking about their projects, are talking about politics. Instead of this new idea, it's about, instead of my idea or our idea, it's my career. And so the people haven't changed. What has changed? And that's why I talk about, for example, the glass of water. The molecules inside the glass of water don't change when you lower the temperature. They go from being wild, sloshing around like a liquid to being totally rigid. And it isn't the molecules that are different. It's the structure. It's a component of their environment. And so what I talk about in Loonshots is how that plays out in larger groups, but it's equally important, although with a few twists, for smaller teams and companies. So, if there's a much longer discussion you could have, but a few short, quick things. One, when I talk about love your artists and soldiers equally, that's loving both phases equally and the need to achieve dynamic equilibrium of a balance between these two phases, life at 32 Fahrenheit, where you can be solid and liquid at the same time. That applies equally well to small businesses where it's less about you have a Loonshot group in one state and a franchise group in another state, and you need to manage them in different ways and bring them together, bridge the divide. But it's less about balancing the tension between two groups of people and more about balancing the tension between two times, between a time for new ideas and a time for discipline and execution. And unless you get that straight in your mind as a leader, that you want to do both, that you want to love your artist time and your soldier time equally, that you want to manage the touch and balance between those two times carefully, you will get your people confused and yourself confused. If you have come up with a new product, it is very important to reduce the risk in that product and to increase the reproducibility of your ability to deliver that product. You want to get it on time, on budget, on spec to your customers consistently with quality. You don't want to be you or your sales guy knocking on a customer's door and saying, here you go, here's your toaster. And the customer said, toaster, I ordered a television. You need that discipline, the rigidity, the execution, the metrics. Otherwise, you won't have a business. Otherwise, you won't have a revenue stream. But at the same time, you need to focus on the new idea, how to improve, what's on the horizon, what are the Loonshots out there that you might be missing. One example I sometimes give is that, and a lot of folks reach out to me over the last few years to work with them on innovation, some private sector, some public sector. One of the most interesting ones has been in the military. Some of the most interesting time I've spent with leadership teams is Army, Navy, Air Force, intelligence community. And last year I was found myself on a nuclear submarine with the admiral responsible for transforming the US Navy for the 21st century. And if you are on a submarine, 200 miles from shore, deep underwater, you don't want to start hearing clanking noises from your nuclear engine. That's your core program or franchise. At the same time, you don't want to be surprised by a new kind of torpedo. That's your loonshots or new ideas or new things that could disrupt your businesses. So for companies, it's a matter of P&L, getting this balance right, balancing the core and the new. And for businesses, it's a matter of P&L and may also be a matter of life or death, of survival of your businesses. So what matters for small businesses is getting that balance right between the time you spend on new ideas and the time you spend on discipline and execution. And that may mean, if you are a leader of a small team, being very clear up front, we're going to take one day a week or one day a month or even a few hours during this time period where we are going to take off our soldier hat, measure these metrics, reduce the risk, and we're going to put on our artist hat and start to take risks, to think about wild, crazy new ideas, which are full of flaws. And that requires a lot of care, a lot of finesse, a lot of fine tuning to bring yourself or your team along with that mindset. So for example, if you're a solo entrepreneur, it becomes equally important that you manage your time and your mindset. Am I in the sort of artist, play, wild, crazy new idea moment? Or am I in the discipline, execution, get things done on time, on budget moment? If you're a writer, a solo writer, for example, you need both. And so entrepreneur, whether by himself or herself or leading a small team, if they don't understand this, if they're unbalanced, if they're just focusing their teams and themselves too much on wild new ideas and not enough on discipline and execution, and don't understand the difference between those two, haven't made a clear line in the sand between those two and made it transparent and clear for everybody what they're expecting when I want you to take risk and fail, and when I want you to reduce risk and not fail, they'll get confused. Instead of water and ice, you'll be trying to do both at the same time and you'll just get slush. So for small businesses, number one, you want to balance your time for new ideas and your time for discipline and execution prospectively, mindfully. Make that clear to yourself and the people that you work with. Number two, something I found very useful when I was pursuing my own crazy ideas, I wrote about in Loonshots as LSC, listen to the suck with curiosity. And what I mean by that is when you are, there's advice that's very common, which is if you are, pursuing a project or an idea or an opportunity, of course, you want to get feedback and you want to acknowledge that feedback. Well, there's a difference between listening, active listening, repeating what you heard, and getting curious. So active listening, which is you can find in any workshop or, stories about online, is sort of repeating what you've heard. But that's often not good enough. If you've put your heart or soul into some project and an investor says, no, I'm not interested, or a customer walks away, and you just say, okay, I understand, and you move on to the next customer, you're missing a very important opportunity. And that's to get curious, to try to tease out from them, to surface, what was it that made them walk away? And that's a skill set. That's an art form, because it's not easy, because people don't want to tell you. If a venture capitalist rejects your idea, what they're going to do is they're going to pat you on the back and say, that's fantastic, you're a brilliant inventor. Why? Well, that's in their interest. There's no upside to them to tell you, give you honest feedback and tell you that's the dumbest idea I've heard in a week, and here's why. Because it may demotivate you and prevent you from coming back to them with your next idea, which might be a good one. And they want you to come back with your next idea. So there's an art form, and some of the most impressive entrepreneurs and innovators and scientists I know, what they're really good at is listening to the suck with curiosity, figuring out how to get that feedback out of investors or customers or partners. And there are creative ways you can do that. For example, you can call in a third-party friend, a mutual friend, and have them go to the person that you went to, let's say the investor who rejected you or the customer who rejected you, where they may be more comfortable telling their friend their honest feedback, and then your friend may be more comfortable giving it to you. Why is that important? Because at the end of that feedback, at the end of what you get from that curiosity, when you pull on that thread, there could be a little gold nugget. For example, an investor might have said, well, that's a really promising, you may have thought, it's a promising project, but there's this other company over in Norway that's doing something similar, and they have these other two features that are better, and they're, at 2/3 the price. And you never heard about that company. Then you go look and see what they're doing. Well, they're doing a couple of things, but those are really easy for you to figure out and do as well. And there are ways you can lower your cost. That precious feedback you would have never gotten unless you practice LSC. Every time you hit a roadblock, transition from this sort of defensive phase. I want to, this guy's rejecting the thing that I poured my heart into. I just want to punch him in the face, towards putting on your Sherlock Holmes hat, your investigator hat. I wonder what made them do that. So that's the second thing that I have found useful, just personally, and mindset is getting really curious about negative results and negative data, and learning how to investigate them. Third phase, in terms of how to get better at thinking big, is understanding what you can think of as sort of the 3 stages of growing a business. And you're in the first stage, you are a startup. You're hungry for cash. You're trying to figure out what's the right product and features. You're trying to figure out what's the right market and customers. You're trying to figure out how to reach them. So it's this first stage when you're exploring and trying to get to something where there's traction, where there's clear fit with between your product and your market. Once you find that, you move to the second stage. And, I spent quite a bit of time with companies in that second stage where they're scaling. Hey, this seems to be working. And now we need to figure out how to manufacture at scale, how to distribute at scale, how to grow at scale, how to hire at scale, and so on. And what are the right balance between internal stuff and external stuff, and how we manage, how we control versus how we empower. So that's the second phase. But there's a third phase. Most companies actually get stuck there. And the really good companies that grow really big, they figure out the next transformation, the next life cycle transformation, which is growing from managing a product to managing ideas. Instead of just focusing on, here's my product and here's my customers, and I'm going to get really good and really systematic about managing my product and my customers, they become as good and as systematic about managing their portfolio of ideas, of new opportunities. So if you want to get better at thinking big, first, understand that you need to love your artist time and soldier time equally, and you need to be mindful about it. Second, try to get really good, both with yourself and the people you work with, on listening to the suck with curiosity. And third, think about how you can be as systematic about managing your new business ideas and prioritizing them and designing a portfolio of how much time and money you're going to spend on the new versus on the core, about getting as systematic about that process, about managing that portfolio of new ideas, as you are about managing your product and your customers. So those are sort of 3 things you can keep in mind.